your points and you can follow me. You can run and hide, but you can never find a way.
Hello there, a very good evening and welcome to another edition of Democracy on the Threat. I'm your host Eddy Layne, and with me in studio this evening is Priya Manickchand. Priya Manickchand is a former minister under the People's Progressive Party Civic. She served as Minister of Human Services as well as Minister of Education, former Member of Parliament, and of course she's a candidate on the People's Progressive Party Civic list for the 2020 elections. Priya, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Eddy, for having me. I think it's really sad that in 2020 we're talking about democracy on the threat, but this is where we are.
Certainly, and yet another day in Guyana where the will of the people is being suppressed, where I would want to refer to as undemocratic forces in our society, both I would say within GCOM and within the APNU AFC, are making every single effort they can to deny the people the right to a government which they chose, to blatantly rig an elections before the entire world. I will ask you for your opening comments with regards to what has been happening since March 2nd.
Yeah, Eddy, we went to the polls 7 weeks ago. Guyanese people went to the polls 7 weeks ago. Many of them first-time voters. Many of us who had only heard of stories of rigging in the past, and we'd read of those stories, and they were all horrible, and they were all fantastic in a way that almost it was fantasy. It wasn't. It didn't seem real that people could do that kind of blatant rigging. We obviously never thought, the younger generation, mine and definitely people younger than me, that this would be something we'd ever live to see again, that we'd ever live through. But here we are 7 weeks later without a declaration that is credible of the elections result. Now, elections are not just about going to the polls and choosing your leaders or choosing who you want to form the government. Elections end when a credible and value declaration is made of the winner of the elections, and when that process is finished by the Guyana Elections Commission. You began by saying that there are forces. That's a really diplomatic way, and I suppose we should I think we could dispense with diplomacy. The APNU AFC, one of the political parties that contested the election, is the only party who would benefit from the rig that we see being attempted, even up to now in my view, by the Guyana Elections Commission. I find it very difficult to believe either Mr. Mingo or Mr. Lowenfield or Claudette Singh or anybody else at the Elections Commission got up one day and decided that they of and by themselves would rig the election and give it to the APNU AFC, assuming we had that kind of wild card playing out there, people on a frolic of their own at GCOM. Then the APNU AFC, their leaders, their members, their candidates could have ended that immediately as soon as it begun by immediately saying we will not benefit from any elections. Here are our statements of poll that we got on election night and 2 days and nights following. This is what it says, as the PPP did with theirs, and this is who won the election. So for me, I would move away from these dressed up language words that say forces. And I would say very clearly the APNU AFC, in collaboration with forces at GCOM, with members of the Guyana Elections Commission Secretariat, and possibly the actual commission, not possibly, the actual commission, that those are the forces that people are talking about who are trying to steal from the people of Guyana their will, that human right they have to choose a government that has been enshrined in our constitution. I think it's shameless. I think it's disgraceful. I think it is something that we must stop now. If we allow the APNU, AFC, the PNC, or any other party to steal an election in 2020, then it doesn't make sense to go to an election in 2025. It doesn't make sense to go to election in 2030, because after they count 5 votes, they could declare the elections for the PNC or the APNU or whatever they're calling themselves in those years. But this is the PNC of old, people who have in their DNA this desire to rig an election. Now, it's one thing with stealing people's will. It's one thing with denying people their will. I mean, that's bad enough. You really can't think of something worse than that. But I'll tell you what's worse than that, Eddie. What's worse than that is service. If you know that from election to election, you could just thief the election, take it, go pretend we're voting and take it at the end of the elections, then there's no need to serve. And that is the real danger here. Because political parties in office attempt to win the hearts and minds and votes of the populace, of the population, of the people who will vote in the next election. And to win the hearts and minds and votes of those persons, you have to serve them. And you have to serve them well. And you have to serve them widely. You have to serve every community. You have to serve every ethnicity. You have to serve every sector in terms of different fields: agriculture, banking, lawyers, housewives, women. You have to serve everyone because you want their vote. And it is through that service and through that reach for the vote and through that quest to win a vote that we see service and people benefit and lives change for the better and countries develop. If a political party is in office and no longer needs to win a vote and win people over and win hearts, then they will just go into office and do what we saw the APNU AFC do over the last 5 years, which is steal, take for themselves, fire people, disregard how people are living, don't look back at all the people who have been fired, at all the people who lost jobs, don't look back at all the people whose lives became much more difficult because of their very harsh policies in various areas: mining, forestry, rice, sugar, just ordinary businesses on the street. They did not serve those people, and so people turned against them and voted them out of office. If we allow them to steal this election, that is exactly what will happen in the coming years. They wouldn't need to serve you. They're just going to take your vote, take the election, and the next time we go to an election. And so it's really important that we resolve today that our children will never ever see this kind of backward theft, open theft that we see happening now at GCOM and with the APNU AFC.
And you made a point about the no need to serve, and I think I read the stories, I suspect you did, and my parents would have told me about stories of what was happening pre-1992, when elections were being rigged. We saw the collapse of our country, the infrastructure, the economy, and every other
because
area.
they come hand in hand. You don't have to, if you're a government, a political party in office, you really don't have to try to do better for people when you know that you'll just take the next election. I mean, you know, there's no motivation to do better. I think these people, the leadership of the APNU AFC, are in and of themselves malicious, evil people who have no intention of serving anyway. But when you remove from them the motivation of winning an election through service, through policies, through programs, then you're really putting yourself at risk and harm's way. It's extremely disconcerting to see that in the face of rolling cameras, in the face of ambassadors standing present, in the presence of the PPPC and the other new political parties, in the presence of the media, that the APNU AFC had no difficulties having Mr. Mingo, the returning officer for Region 4, declare election results for Region 4 that portrayed them as an overall winner, which is actually not how the people of Guyana voted.
We've seen what happened since Mr. Mingo's, and I would want to say the disgraced returning officer, because I think no longer we can refer to him as a returning officer with some standing. We've seen
he has none, and Mr. Mingo should be nowhere near this process. He should, I mean, if he had any decency, he wouldn't have done what he did in the first place. But if he has any decency remaining, he would recuse himself from this process.
And probably say exactly what motivated him or how he met to that point. But what I'm saying is, after he would have done, on 2 occasions, he attempted to declare fraudulent results. We've seen, despite attempts by CARICOM, despite the strong statements from the international observer groups, from the local observers, from the international community, and hundreds of countries, hundreds of international organizations, all calling for credible and transparent results to be declared. I think now,
and specifically saying that the results declared by Mingo are neither credible nor transparent, and they cannot be relied on to form the government.
we're still seeing attempts up to today, like you said in your opening statements, where all sorts of excuses are coming up from either the commissioners appointed by the APNU AFC or the Secretariat, who had 156 days first proposed to do the recount. Then you have excuses of having to get clarity, having to seek legal opinion, up to the point now where Justice Claudette Singh is saying that she is awaiting guidance from CARICOM. If I could recall what happened when the CARICOM team first came here, Justice Claudette Singh didn't await the arrival of the team or the date for the arrival. I think she had already begun the process after giving that commitment to start the recount, and the team, the CARICOM team, worked with her schedule, whatever was prepared. Now you're hearing that she's waiting on a word from CARICOM. And in the first instance, before I bring you in, even before she got to the point of waiting for a response from CARICOM, she had practically turned over the process of determining when the recount will happen to people who do not want the recount in the first place, the likes of Moses Nagabutu and others.
Yeah, Justice Claudette Singh, retired Justice Claudette Singh, has been for me a colossal disappointment. I say that this is a personal view I hold. I don't necessarily speak on behalf of the party that I support. On that ground, she has been, I up to very recently, I thought, okay, maybe she's just floating. Maybe, she didn't understand what she had to do, but you couldn't get to this point having gone through all that has happened and still be making these kinds of blunders, and expect a reasonably soft approach from someone like me who relies on her to get this process right. She has duties under the law. She has statutory duties, and she has been dilly-dallying with those and turning them over to people who should not have any. I mean, somebody threw up a video a few nights ago of the night of March 4th, where there's a chairman saying she wasn't aware of a decision that was made by the Chief Elections Officer. She turned over to the Deputy Chief Elections Officer and gave her the floor to say things that were not true. There was very little effort by the chairman made to conclude this process fairly and swiftly. And I think that is, for me, a huge disappointment. That you can't be unaware of my own advocacy for women in positions throughout my life.
I am aware.
Right. That we have women serve in positions because we're equally capable and we're actually better than some of the men and so on. She's turned out to be a huge disappointment in that regard. She's not capable. Doesn't appear capable to me, and I think she has a chance to finally redeem herself. And every time I think she's going to step up and do what she needs to do, we see other things like saying, just like you said, turning over to Moses Nagabutu. Now Nagabutu is squatting in office right now. He refuses to leave, although he knows fully well that the people of Guyana chased him out and told him they did not want him through their ballot. He knows that because he's seen the results. He has the same results we have. He refuses to leave. How could you then turn the process over to him? And he's an active stakeholder who has every interest in staying in office longer so that he could benefit from climbing on the backs of the people of this country. A big fat salary and perks and all that he's neither earned nor entitled to at this point. And so that was another huge error on her part. It took, so I am disappointed. I believe we see from our partners and allies in the international community, the ABCE, CARICOM, Commonwealth, OAS, all the people speaking, observer groups speaking, that they're practically begging the APNU AFC to stop the attempted rig. They're practically begging them to do the right thing. They're begging GCOM to do the right thing. And I suspect strongly they're giving them a very long rope. It's up to GCOM whether they're going to hang themselves or whether they're going to do the right thing. It remains for us to see. What we know is that the PPPC is not going to sit quietly as any attempts are made to continue the blatant rig of the elections that we've seen so far. We're not going to sit quietly by and let that happen, because we owe it to this country to make sure people can express themselves through their ballots about what kind of leadership they want. And we're going to fight it down to the end to make sure the will of the people of Guyana, as expressed on the 2nd of March through their ballot, is reflected in the government we see in this country.
Having taken into account all that has happened over the past 7 weeks or so, Priya, and the reality now is that we are faced with a pandemic. The world is faced with a pandemic, as in the COVID-19. Our country is in a very, very peculiar position, is in some uncharted waters, if you want to call it, at this point in time, where we don't have a government legally in place. We are still to conclude the results of an elections that was held 7 weeks ago. Our people are suffering, both economically and in terms of provision of health services. There seems to be no way out at this point in time based on how it's going, because you're hearing, like I mentioned, all these excuses. Our country is exposed to serious sanctions from the countries around the world. A number of countries have hinted at the possibility if this matter is not resolved. A perfect example is the request to the World Bank for, I think, $5 million US by I don't even want to say the government, but those who still holding on to power, and the constantly being overlooked by the World Bank has now placed our people even in a worst position. How do we move forward from here?
You know, Eddy is really reprehensible. Let me tell you, right now, people woke up this morning, and I know that for sure because people are talking to us about it. Woke up this morning, not sure how they're going to feed their children. You see, all those vendors who used to sell and be able to go home, buy things, take it home, cook, pay their bills, light bill, water bill, and so on, they have no money. People who were working with people who now have closed their stores, those sales girls, sales boys on Regent Street, a lot of maids, a lot of because the bosses aren't earning too. So how do you pay your staff? A lot of people are without an income right now. Those people are without food because it's now been 3 weeks since the lockdown. They're without food, they're without the ability to pay their bills. They're without the ability to even protect themselves by wearing masks and sanitizing, and so those things cost money. What has the government done? The government has folded their arms and said, we're waiting on a donation from China for masks. They said they're waiting on some money they applied for. They have given no money to people who have lost their jobs and don't have food in their house. CDC was giving food hampers, not given by the government. It was food hampers provided by the private sector and various donations. They stopped those food hampers, so people are no longer getting that. They have distributed not a single mask to anyone in this country. I'm talking about de facto government. I'm also talking about the APNU, AFC as political parties. They've done nothing. They've looked after themselves. They've masked up. They're in full isolation. We don't see them. They're collecting a fat salary, but we're not seeing them. In the meanwhile, the people of this country are left to struggle alone. Thankfully, the president-elect has established a national task force. That task force has distributed over 50,000 face masks, free of course, because of donations that it got. The task force has distributed hampers. It will continue to distribute face masks and hampers to people all across this country. Some of the new parties are also doing some good work in getting help out to people. The government has done nothing. They've sat back. Now, if you pass outside Western unions, that's when you see the kind of trouble our people are in, and it's really very sad. All the Western unions have people lined up outside practicing.
Very long lines.
Very long lines. Practicing the social distancing. We're presently here trying to do 6 feet. This is not 6 feet. But when you pass outside of all the Western unions, you see the lines outside with people trying to get money just to feed their children, to look after their children. Education is in a mess. There's no plan about what will happen for the next. I don't see school reopening for now, because this is, the learning around the world from the medical professionals suggest that this is going to be with us. And if you don't aggressively test, which is not happening in Guyana, and do the lockdowns for lengthy periods, then you'll be lurching from lockdown to lockdown with a lot of tragedies in between. And so with school being closed, there's very little effort to try to keep our children occupied, if not fully instructed. Of course, that's hard to do because they shut down the one laptop per family program. So their entire homes, many of our homes, most of our homes are without access to one, a computer, and two, the internet. So again, the private school students are going to have an advantage over public school students. So the Ministry of Education is in a mess. The Ministry of Finance is just talking about what they've applied for. They haven't told us yet that why they have been refused, and what the language is to them about their applications. The Ministry of Health has some incredibly talented and dedicated employees, and the people of doctors and nurses and even some admin staff working throughout this period, but the management of this has been below what it should be, way below what it should be. We know, we've heard of tests having to go to the minister before they're actually done, and we have seen meals that are served at some of the quarantine isolation facilities that really, it's not even that people want a 5-star meal, it's that they have to eat a certain way when they are detected, when they are tested positive, to be able to fight this disease, because you're talking about boosting your immunity and getting some vitamin C in your bodies, and so dry bread does not do that effectively. And so it's really been a horrible thing. Now, if stealing an election alone is not bad enough, stealing an election and delaying this process through a pandemic while Granger hides in his house and Nagamootoo hides and every other minister is hiding while the people of Guyana are suffering, that is criminal, inhumane behavior, and that has no place in this. And I know that people are judging the AP and UAFC for this. They prefer to govern over, and this is going to sound extremely morbid, they prefer to govern over dead bodies than to face the reality of how people voted on March the 2nd. If you think you won, and that's always a concern, you think you won the election, then do what you have to do to show us that you won the election. And that is very simply, there's one region here that's that has been queried from day one, and that's Region 4. And they've done nothing to say, they just say we won. They've done nothing to show that they won. Whereas the PPPC has done everything to substantiate what we have been seeing.
But Priya, you spoke about the meals people are getting and the support that is being given to the health sector to deal with this pandemic by those who are squatting in office. One thing I think we can safely say is that it appears as though some of these very people who are squatting in office, the AP and UAFC, calling themselves government, seem to be using even this pandemic for corruption and cronyism. When one look at what is happening at the Ocean View
that's
hotel,
such a mystery.
It is, Jordan himself said over $1 billion just to refurbish the facility. That doesn't include fitting it with beds and all the other medical apparatus and pieces that are needed. So you have that happening. You have the minister having to get tests. You have persons being given tennis roll and probably I think I saw something looking like ketchup or something like, and that kind of thing. While you're waiting on money from the World Bank and other places to deal with the pandemic, but you're finding $1 billion or in excess of $1 billion to put it into a private facility. When you could have simply probably moved the patients from the Western Regional
There's so many different options.
That facility.
So many different options that could have happened, and you could have said to people very clearly, you know, while they make decisions, the thing about when the horses are starving, while you're looking at decisions to be made, while they make these 101, they've taken a very firm decision. We're going to refurbish this private property to place patients in. How about making some decisions to get us less patients? And that would be making sure people have food in their houses, making sure they don't have to struggle with water bills and light bills and internet bills, telephone bills, making sure that basic nutrition is available for children. If some of that money could have been spent there, then it was very easy to see us needing that facility less. And you know, Eddie, that's the problem. Every single thing this government has done, everything. I can't think of a single project that they have done, a single program that they have done that hasn't had really stinking, nasty corruption attached to it. For the same program, the same project to make this place, Ocean View, ready for as a quarantine facility or as a hospital, is so we should not be asking questions about who owns it and where you're getting the money and why you're spending so much money. There should have been something so very transparent, so very open, and it's not. And that's for me, the government proves every single day, the de facto government, the AP and UAFC, why it is they're so unsuited for office.
I mentioned earlier that a number of countries, I think the Secretary of State of the US, the Assistant Secretary of State for the Western Hemisphere, we've heard the US Ambassador here spoken, we've heard Congressmen would have spoken, the EU Ambassador would have spoken, the EU Foreign Office, the British Foreign Office, I think, would have spoken. We saw a letter that the Private Sector Commission received from the European Union, and we heard, I think today or yesterday, the EU Ambassador here would have spoken, and all of them had one simple request, and I think that's the request that the PAP has, and I've deliberately not included the international observers, is for there to be transparent tabulation, or in this case a recount of the votes and a transparent declaration of the results so that we can move forward. Those that I've mentioned also have indicated that unless this happens, or any person who decided to take the oath of office with the results as is, the fraudulent results, will first face individual sanctions, and then we may very well face sanctions as a country. Let us talk a little bit about that.
So, Eddie, from the 6th, the first fraudulent declaration that was made by the Guyana Elections Commission through Mr. Mingo that carried the Valda Lawrence signature, that was made on the 5th. It was since vitiated by the Chief Justice. She said it was badly done, it was wrongly done, it was fraudulently done, it cannot stand. From the 6th, you started getting statements from the international community. Forget all the observers. So we got from the Commonwealth, from the OAS, from the Carter Center, from the ABCE countries, from CARICOM, just about everybody who could make a statement made us. France, Norway, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Grenada, Barbados. Everybody had made statements from the night of the 5th, 6th, 7th, those days. But then you see a new set of statements coming through in the last 48 hours. Commonwealth issued a statement, I think it was yesterday. The minister responsible for geographical area from the UK wrote a letter to the private sector in response to a letter that they had written to her. The US is constantly tweeting and talking about their support for the OAS position, the Organization of American States. We've seen over the last 48 to 72 hours people again renewing their call for democratically elected government, and they've been very, very clear. One, the elections results that have been declared so far have not been credible. They've not been declared in a transparent manner. They cannot be relied on. Two, that anyone who benefits, so Eddy, they've moved past from saying who's wrong, and because Granger has this thing about saying, oh, I don't know about that, it's GCOM, and it's Nagamutu, and it's Harman, and all these, he blames everybody else, and Harman says it's not me, it's Nagamutu, and Nagamutu says it's not me, it's GCOM, and that kind of merry-go-round. The people said, listen, stop with all this foolishness and this childishness. We're telling you that anyone who benefits from that kind of fraudulent declaration and that kind of theft will get into trouble personally. And they've been very clear that sanctions, for example, yesterday the Commonwealth said, the EU today the EU said in a statement that it would be, it was, I think the EU ambassador appearing on a Kaichur News program, said very clearly that they have done this before. The EU is going to be unable to work with any government who benefits from rigged elections, from theft of the vote, from the denial of the will of the people. They cannot work with a government like that because it's against every principle that they have. And he went on to say, listen, we've done this several times before in various countries, in various parts of the world. I myself, this is the ambassador speaking, have worked in some of those countries when sanctions came. And he said, we're very clear, we're not going to be able to tolerate it. It's not a discipline we're going to be able to, we will be disciplined and we will exercise our options to stop cooperation, I believe is what he said, with any country that benefits, or any government that benefits from flawed, rigged, fraudulent elections. Those are my words. And so they've been very clear. Ministers, their families, children, that's what we talk about, personal sanctions. If you have a child studying and a wife traveling and so on, ministers, their families and so on will definitely have, will probably most likely be sanctioned. That's what they mean by personal sanctions. But they're also very clear. We can't give to an illegal government, a government that stole the will of the people, a government that stayed in office although people told them to get out. We can't give to them money so that they could continue their rigging ways, so that they could continue to perpetuate themselves as a government when people don't want them as a government, so that they could continue to rob the people of a country. They're not going to give money to a government like that. Now, what happens when you have a government who can't receive aid, either in the form of money or in the form of any kind of trade and cooperation? The people of the country will suffer, right? When you have a whole country that can't get foreign help, can't benefit from agreements, bilateral agreements, multilateral agreements, the whole country will suffer. And people in the country are going to find it extremely difficult. So if you think life is hard now, we could very well go back to the place where we don't have money, very easily go back to the place where we don't have money to import very basic food items that we're presently importing.
But if you also look, Priya, you mentioned about those long lines at places like Western Union and MoneyGram and so on. What countries do when they impose sanctions is eventually start pulling, first and foremost, companies that are registered in let's say the US, let's say the US intends to impose sanctions. The US will ask US companies to remove themselves from Guyana. May very well happen. They may very well cut any financial flows between Guyana, which would also include things like the money transfer agencies. So you have a small group of people, a couple of people, who are for all intents and purposes holding on are not wanting to give up, even though, and they have the SOPs. They know that they lost the elections, not wanting to demit office, to have a democratic and peaceful transition of government. This small group is putting an entire country, more so the very poor people in this country, at great risk. So your relatives were sending you a little small piece from overseas. I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but I'm just speaking the reality.
What will happen. So yeah,
I'm just speaking the reality.
And it's not, this is, let me just explain, Eddie. It brings me no pleasure, gives me no pleasure to say any of this. Gives me no pleasure to speak ill of the management of the COVID-19. I would like to say Guyana is doing its best. We are not, because we have an inept government in place. I would like to say that we are at a place where we could all insist that we get loans and grants. We can't do that, because when we get it, there's a government in place who is doing everything they can, not to look after people, but to keep themselves in office. And so you can't even be sure that when they get money, they're going to spend it on the people of this country. It's going to be spent on keeping themselves in office. We just saw $72,000 US a month being paid to a lobbyist firm or a lawyer or somebody in the US to say that we didn't see what we saw, which is Mingo standing and declaring results that he did not verify. That's what they're trying to tell us. And I mean, we are paying for that. I don't care what they said. They initially said that the government of Guyana was going to defend the people of Guyana. Well, not me, you're not speaking on my behalf. And so the government was justifying why it paid that, and then Harman came and said, oh, the government didn't pay. People offered $200 and $300
upset supporters
or something. The point I'm making is we believe that the people of Guyana paid for that, and instead of $72,000, $15 million could have gone a far way to giving a lot of families a brace for a month while we're sitting out this COVID thing. They're not concerned about that. They're concerned about staying in office. They don't care about how the lady in Sophia and how the person behind Kingston and how the man from Port Morant and the person from Blackbush and the lady from Wales, they don't care about how those people live. Everything for them is focused on perpetuating their unlawful presence, unwanted presence in office. And that's what happens when you have this kind of, when we have autocratic governance like that. It's all about preserving their illegal stay in office rather than looking after the people that they were supposed to.
I think we have just probably about 3 minutes or so to go for our 45 minutes program. Your closing comments with regards to where we are, how do we move forward, and how this intends to impact, how this will impact the lives of our people unless there is an early, speedy resolution to this issue.
I think GCOM has to act decisively and sensibly. Claudette Singh, retired judge of the Supreme Court, present chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission, has to step up and do what she has not thus far done, which is to lead that commission in a way that will bring relief to the people of Guyana. Everything is dependent on the elections results being declared credibly, fairly, transparently. The people's health and safety, the people of this country, their health and safety depends on that reliable, credible, fair declaration. The people's, the businessmen and the economic stability of this country depend on the credible, reliable, and fair declaration of results. The very democracy of this country relies on, and life of this country relies on the credible, fair, transparent declaration of results. It is all in Claudette Singh's hands how this will work. And so I do not buy any longer that she has to get advice from here and suggestions from there. She is not, and has never been, in my view, a helpless female who cannot make decisions that are sensible. She has an understanding of the law clearer than most people. Indeed, that is why the law suggests a preference for a judge type personality. And so it is up to Ms. Singh to take this commission and do what she has not yet done, lead it sensibly, fairly, and fearlessly, and take us to a place where we have results that are credible, that are fair, and that are transparent. And the only way we can do that is to begin the recount promptly, to make sure that during that process you don't have excuse after excuse that she is a damsel in distress regarding solving it, that she immediately resolves those issues as they arise, that before issues arise she puts as many procedures and so on in place to prevent issues and ambiguities arising. And so for me, it's all up to her and what she does. The PPP has been very clear, and the commissioners of the Ghana Elections Commission who are nominated by the PPPC have been very clear. They have one thing in common, and that is to ensure that the March 2nd general and regional elections are concluded fairly, transparently, and a credible declaration is made. And so our commissioners on that commission will do whatever it takes to make that happen. It's all up to Justice Claudette Singh, because I believe we're very clear that the other commissioners, in my view, and I'd be happy to debate them on it if they wish, in my view, they have every interest in delaying these results and in doing what has happened so far, which is to give the AFC a win that they did not secure at the polls. So Justice Singh could make all the difference in the world with taking and making sensible decisions that are fair and fearless.
Priya, I want to thank you very much for joining me this evening to discuss the current state of affairs in our country with regards to the March 2nd general and regional elections. 7 weeks would have passed and the Guyanese are still waiting. I think most Guyanese know already who won the elections, but the reality is, unless a full declaration is made by the Ghana Elections Commission, then there is no way forward. That declaration can only be made once there is a recount of the votes and there is transparent, as you rightly said, and credible results declared, so that we can move forward. I want to continue to encourage all of you to take the necessary precautions during this COVID pandemic. Remain at home, stay at home. You should not, for any and every reason, try to leave your homes unless you have to go out. I encourage you to wear a mask. Practice social distancing. Remember to wash your hands for at least 20 seconds as often as possible. Until next time, I want to say on behalf of Priya Manickchand, I want to say thank you very much for joining us this evening, and to have a good rest of the evening. Stay safe.